Latvia spends now more than 3% of GDP for defense. It's actually 3.15%, and it's more than 1 billion. If you compare the situation 1 decade ago, so Latvia spent only 1%, even less than 1% of GDP.
Welcome to Baltic Spotlight, hosted by the Joint Baltic American National Committee, JBANC. Today we are joined by Dr. Māris Andžāns, Director of the Center for Geopolitical Studies in Riga and an Associate Professor at Riga Stradins University, for a discussion on the Latvian response to new security challenges on NATO's eastern flank. We hope you enjoy the program.
Hey everyone, welcome to our Baltic Spotlight hosted by the Joint Baltic American National Committee, which we have advocated for Baltic Americans since 1961. We're really fortunate to be joined by Dr. Māris Andžāns, who's currently the Director of the Center for Geopolitical Studies Riga and also an Associate Professor at Riga Stradins University. He was just come back from the United States actually as a visiting scholar at the Harvard University Davis Center. We had the privilege of meeting him in person. And on a personal note, he unknowingly also defined my introduction to Baltic security issues by stating that there are 3 things you need to understand about Baltic security, which is Russia, Russia, and Russia. So, Dr. Andžāns, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. So I think it would be best if we get started. You recently wrote an article in the past year on small powers, geopolitical crisis, and hyper-securitization, Latvia, and the effects of Russia's second war in Ukraine. In this article, you described that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the largest geopolitical and societal shock in recent history of the country. Everyone in the audience will be aware of this trauma, but what were some of the measures that Latvia has taken to improve the national defense capabilities as a result of this event?
Well, thank you, Lee, for the question. And first, I would also like to thank JBANC. What I've seen, JBANC is truly impressive organization, and it makes the Baltic voice a lot louder in DC and other places. So thank you, Carl, and the other guys for doing what you're doing. Truly impressive. So about the securitization and the issues that Latvia has encountered and how it has countered Russia's influence. So it has done tremendously a lot. Well, by saying that, I do not mean that there is nothing more to do. Well, there are a lot of things that have to be accomplished. But basically it was across the entire spectrum. Let's start with the military defense. Latvia spends now more than 3% of GDP for defense. It's actually 3.15%, and it's more than 1 billion. If you compare the situation 1 decade ago, so Latvia spent only 1%, even less than 1% of GDP. Latvia has reinstated conscription. So the first conscripts already have finished their service. So the next 2 batches are currently in service. Latvia has bought quite so many new stuff, military stuff, also from the United States, including the Black Hawks. Latvia has ordered HIMARS and also other military equipment. So Latvia has finally almost completed the fence on the border with Russia and Belarus. And currently Latvia, as well as Lithuania and Estonia, are building the so-called Baltic defense lines. So these are anti-tank trenches. These are the so-called Dragons, teeth, and also hedgehogs to prevent tanks or any other military vehicles from crossing into Latvia, as well as Lithuania and Estonia. Then energy security. Finally, we are almost completely independent of Russia when it comes to natural gas and electricity, because all 3 Baltic states have stated that they will not import Russia's natural gas anymore. Lithuania has completed the natural gas interconnection between Lithuania and Poland. Estonia built a berth for LNG tankers near Tallinn. And next year, all three Baltic states will disconnect themselves from the so-called BREL, the synchronization network with Russia and Belarus. So it has taken more than 3 decades to become also independent when it comes to energy, because for some 20 years we were an island of energy in the European Union and also NATO. So what else? When it comes to media space, Latvia has banned all Russian state and related media. So you cannot legally access Russian media here in Latvia. The education system has been reformed. Starting next year, Latvia will finally end the segregation of the schools in Latvia, because so far we had like 2 streams, Latvian schools and Russian schools with Russian languages instruction, language, not along all the subject, but as a part, some part of the subject. So that will finally come to an end. Then Latvia has demolished the remaining Soviet-era monuments. So there's no more the so-called Victory Monument. There is no more monument to Pushkin. And there's also no more Pushkin Street in Riga. So these are only some of the examples. And there are many, many other examples that we can discuss later on. Over to you, Lee.
Yeah, excellent. And I guess another interesting takeaway I got from your article was that it wasn't necessarily just a top-down approach from the government, but there was a grassroots effort as well. Can you talk about the grassroots impact on policy outcome, as well as maybe some of the initiatives that the civil society has taken?
Yeah, it's a very good point that you noticed. So there's not like, top-down approach that, state institutions will tell you whom to support and why to support. So for majority of Latvians, it came naturally. There have been large demonstrations, petitions. Many people have donated to the cause of Ukrainians. I think in the first year or so, one of the companies had conducted sociological poll, according to which half of Latvia's population had donated to Ukraine in one form or another form. Then many companies here in Latvia have also donated things and also financial resources to Ukraine. And still, when you drive across Latvia, you can see Ukrainian flags, not only at schools and state institutions, but also at private companies. So that's their free choice.
And also, Latvia is not known to have taken many refugees, but in the light of the Ukraine war, I'm not sure if you can touch on some of the efforts that people have done in terms of hosting, as well as accommodating a new influx of refugees as well.
Yeah, exactly. The Baltic states were criticized a decade or so ago when Balts didn't show much of sympathies towards accepting migrants from the Middle East. But the war in Ukraine showed that Balts are welcoming when it comes to refugees that are fleeing a war and who try, to settle and at one of the first opportunities, geographic opportunities. So all 3 Baltic states have accommodated quite many Ukrainian refugees, and I think at one moment in Estonia, some 5% of the population were refugees from Ukraine. So these are quite large numbers. And in Latvia, it was I think 2022 when more than 35,000 Ukrainian refugees were registered. And before that, only some 40,000 Ukrainians lived in Latvia. So basically the the count of refugees was almost the same. Maybe even it was the same or even higher than historically Ukrainians that live here.
Yeah, certainly. And regarding as a percentage of population, it's not a small ask for these states to accommodate these refugees. I want to evolve our conversation a little bit more towards, I guess, global leadership and regarding policy towards Ukraine, such as Latvia leading a drone coalition. And I recently heard that Lithuania was leading a demining coalition. Do you see that there are more opportunities for smaller states to take on political leadership, such as the Baltics, in light of the heightened European security issues?
Well, definitely. Well, there is a lot of space. Ukraine is a large country, and Russia has devastated Ukraine in so many sectors. Is attacking Ukraine daily, and also energy infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and so forth and so forth. So that's why there are a lot of initiatives, those that you mentioned, and also others. For example, our Center for Geopolitical Studies Riga, we have established a Latvian Ukrainian think tank network. So there are many initiatives like these. And it's obvious that Ukraine will need assistance for a long time, decade or two or even more.
And what are the outcomes of this Latvian-Ukrainian think tank network? Have there been any results in research? What is the results of these collaborations?
Well, we are only starting now. My colleague will head to Kiev in some 2 or 3 weeks, so we are only at the beginning. And we hope to produce common publications and also joint events. So probably next year we'll see some practical outcomes of this. And again, this is also something that was our initiative, and then we see that there's what we can also help with Ukrainian think tanks and also other institutes. They also, not only the Ukraine's army needs assistance, but also the civil society, think tanks, universities. Well, there are so many needs.
Absolutely, and I think being in Washington, one of the first things you learn is that it takes many different groups to solve a political issue. And on our end, the Ukraine diaspora groups are certain our natural allies as well. I want to turn the conversation into a little bit more detailed on conscription. Last summer, ahead of reintroducing conscription, you wrote an article summarizing the civil society's evolving attitude towards conscription, both the Latvian government and the society as a whole, and its evolution. Obviously, the tension in the security environment played a large role in the recent policy change for Latvia. I was wondering if you can kind of summarize those insights in terms of the evolution of attitude from the ban of conscription in 2007. Now we've come to a point where it's begun to be implemented in 2023. And as you mentioned, we had the first cohort finish their training.
Oh, yeah. So when Latvia decided to abolish conscription, the decision was unanimous. So all present members of the parliament voted for this proposal to abolish conscription. And it took, well, almost 2 decades. Well, Estonia never abolished it, and Lithuania reinstated conscription in 2015. In my view, that was a grave mistake for Latvia not to act earlier. And well, it was sort of a possible political suicide, if Ministry of Defense would have proposed to bring back conscription earlier, because it was quite a controversial issue in the society. We also have conducted some sociological polls. So usually there were some 40 to 45% supportive, and approximately the same number against conscription. As many youngsters didn't see, well, any benefit in conscription. They saw that it's like, a year to waste, better start to work, go to university and so forth. And there were also associations with the Soviet model of conscription, which included also violence against conscripts. And we see also many news reports from Russia, how it is well, deploying conscripts to the front lines of Ukraine. So these were the associations before, and the public polls show that opinions towards conscription have improved. In 2022, support was only around 45%. Before Latvia announced the proposal to bring back conscription. So it was like, I think, 2 months before the decision was made public. And in 1 year, the support was already about 60%. Also this year, in a poll that we conducted, it was around 64%. So there haven't been scandals or large protests, and it seems that society has accepted this as a norm.
And so in the recent cohort, I believe your article stated there was 400 state defense soldiers in the first 2 calls. also sign your articles, says Estonia and Lithuania conscript around 4,000 yearly. So obviously there'll be a continued rise with the goal of these levels reaching the 4,000 number in 2028. Could you cite some of the challenges in scaling up the number of conscripts for Latvia?
Well, yeah, so the first intake was around 250 soldiers, so that's quite a slow start, and we would have wished but more conscripts to be drafted. But the Ministry of Defense tells that the infrastructure is an issue, and also the available number of instructors is an issue. So they are scaling up, and next year in 2025 there will be already around 1,000 conscripts. And also one thing that I have to mention is that the first two these cohorts they were volunteers, only volunteers. And only the third cohort, which started the service only this summer, among them 70 were conscripts, so that some 370 or 80 or so, they were volunteers, and the remaining were conscripts. So that was not their wish, but they won the lottery. So basically there was a randomized lottery among the all available youngsters in Latvia, and well, they have to serve.
Very good. If we turn the question to one of your more recent publications, a very compelling article that I recommend everyone to check out, Do Baltic Russian Speakers Blame Russia for the War in Ukraine? You mentioned that there was a flood of deep Sovietization, which you've mentioned earlier, including the banning of Russian media, renaming of street signs, removal of Soviet-era monuments. But at the same time, these political actions do not necessarily reflect the entirety of the Latvian society. From your research, what has been the response of Russian speakers to the war in Ukraine?
Well, it's complicated. On the one hand, it's not a black and white picture, because quite often Latvia and also Estonia tends to be portrayed as basically you have Latvians and Estonians on one side, and then you have Russians. But it's more complicated because among Russian speakers, there are also Belarusians and Ukrainians. Quite many Ukrainians use the Russian language as the primary language. So the views differ among Russian speakers, and that's one thing. But having told that, there is also a polarization among Russian speakers. For three years in a row, we conducted polls, national representative polls in Latvia, and we asked one of the questions, do you blame Russia for war in Ukraine? Among Latvians, ethnic Latvians, or those who speak Latvian as their primary language, some 80 to 90% told that yes, Russia is to blame. Among Russian speakers, there's only 30 to 40% in those margins. So again, is the glass half empty or half full? It's up to interpretation. So it's obvious that there are quite so many Russian speakers who stand with Ukraine, but at the same time there are quite many who don't. And what we have seen across many other polls, that significant part of Russian speakers do not disclose their views. So they tend to say that, I don't know, I have difficulties to formulate my opinion. And possibly that is because of the societal pressure, and that they might be unwilling to share views that do not correspond to the majority of Latvians' views here. So, summarizing that, the Russian speakers also quite a group that is not monolithic group, and views are different, and views of some of them are worrying. And recently, one of the internet portals of Latvia has started a series of reports about the possible tank kissers, and then revealing quite ardent supporters of Russia inside here in Latvia.
And I'm not sure if I read your work correctly, but there has also been incidents of, I would say, like hybrid attacks on Latvia. There was the Molotov cocktail being thrown at the Latvian Occupation Museum, and I'm not sure if there's been incidents of cars with Ukrainian flags being attacked. Have we seen some political violence from these groups in Latvia?
Yeah, exactly. So there have been quite many incidents, less so recently, but still. I haven't seen the latest statistics, but I think it was like the first half year, could be that police started some 100 criminal proceedings and more than 200 administrative proceedings related to Ukrainian symbols. Well, be like, number plates of Ukraine or flags of Ukraine and so forth. So there have been quite many incidents. And you also rightly pointed to the incident when Molotov cocktail was thrown in the Occupation Museum of Latvia. So there are such incidents, unfortunately.
I want to turn to, I guess, a topic that's more focused on the U.S., but I recently saw that on Latvian state television that you were interviewed concerning our U.S. elections. Just out of curiosity, what interest do Latvians have in the U.S. elections, or what questions do they have about the U.S. political process going on currently?
I think the election, November 5th, this is one of the top issues among the foreign policy issues. People follow the electoral process in the United States, and people are concerned, obviously, about the future course of the American policy, not only towards Baltics, but also Ukraine. And then one of the issues of concern is what policy will the next administration take towards the Baltic states and Ukraine.
And do you think Latvia has done a good job of mitigating the potential of a conservative administration that may have less of a transatlantic view? Do you think the outreach between Latvia and maybe more conservative ideologies and parties in the U.S. has been sufficient, or has there been an effort to reach those groups?
Well, as the diplomats and politicians will tell you, Latvia will work with either persons that will be holding the presidency of the United States. But at the same time, there is a clear favorite, even among those who will not reveal their choice. And this is not the 45th president of the United States, because things were not bad during the presidency of President Trump. So Latvia had quite strong support. It even increased during his presidency, but there are concerns about not only about the direct support to Baltic states, but also about NATO. Attitude towards NATO, attitude towards other allies, especially Ukraine, because the national security, national defense of the Baltic states is closely related to Ukraine. So it's not only fine that we are fine, but also Ukraine must be fine. And it has been perceived with concern that one of the candidates has promised to solve the war before he starts the presidency, and also by declining to answer if it is in the best interest of the United States that Ukraine wins the war. So this is indeed a very big question here in the Baltic states, especially in Latvia.
And just before I ask my next question, I just invite the audience as well. If you have any questions, you're free to insert them in the chat or have a hand raised as well, and we'll open up to the audience. I guess just as a brief note to your point, I think as people who represent the diaspora, who are members of the diaspora, we experience the same thing when we hear conservative critiques of NATO, also about critiques of not hitting the 2% mark, but with the Baltics hitting their 3% marks, at at least there is the argument to be said that through the budget, the Baltics have made defense a priority. So it has made the argument a little bit easier on the Hill. And I see that one of our fellow colleagues, Carl Heike Yokes, has a question. Mr. Heike Yokes, you want to ask your question now?
Yes, I just have a question about the long-term capability to have a large-scale conscription model, because currently every single Baltic state is having a demographic issues with falling birth rates, and they're concerned with other countries and other regions and self-governing areas such as Taiwan, where they're now believing that they no longer have enough children or enough young men in order to fulfill their conscription numbers. How do you think Latvia could handle the situation in the long term with the declining birth rates, but at the same time maintain a strong defense force?
No, thank you for the question. And this obviously might become an issue in the long term, but at the same time, I think it shouldn't be an issue to draft 4,000 conscripts per year, and also trends in the Baltic states when it comes to demographics are different. The trend is a lot better in Estonia, and when it comes to Estonia and Lithuania, so there haven't been major issues, over the past years by finding the sufficient amount of conscripts. And having told that, also have to underline that small states, and especially the Baltic states, they have no other choice. And it's interesting to know that in 2022, there were some 800 vacancies in the National Armed Forces in Latvia. Basically, the draft is the only way on how to proceed. And in case there will be any issues, so probably the Ministry of Defense will take some corrective measures.
So obviously you just were recently in the United States for a year. And if anyone in the audience wants to check out, he has many of his highlights posted on Facebook. So I guess, I'm not sure if you can reflect on any of your own highlights or if there was any peak moments for you. I believe you met Joseph Nye. For us in the political science space is one of the apostles of soft power. And also you were able to visit FPRI in Philadelphia. Could you highlight some of your findings for the political science scene in the United States and Baltic studies here in the US that you found during your travels?
Well, I have a lot of impressions because I had the opportunity to meet many people, also Balts, including Latvia's ambassador both to the United States, to the United Nations, met also honorary consuls of Massachusetts and also in Philadelphia. Also mentioned Joseph Nye, the author of the Soft Power and many other things. So Harvard was, fantastic place to be, and also had the opportunity to speak at the annual Baltic American Scientific Conference at the Yale University, which is also quite a good place to share findings of various studies. But anyway, my impression of the Baltics in the United States is that the Baltic states have quite a good image, and that JBANC is really doing a very good job by raising the awareness in Congress, especially about the issues of concern in Baltic states and also Ukraine. So I find that among those who know who are the Baltic states where they are, they have quite a positive image, and JBANC and other organizations and compatriots at large have contributed greatly to this positive perception.
Yeah, and I think we are very fortunate to work in a space where being the Baltics so aligned with the US on many policy issues. And we had Thomas Janalunas from Lithuania. He was a visiting scholar to the Hudson Institute, did some research as well in terms of alignment on China policy as well, which is a question we get at a lot of our advocacy meetings. So certainly having such a strong ally in the Baltics helps our advocacy so much. And if anyone doesn't have any last minute questions, I just want to thank Dr. Andžāns for being with us today and for your insights. For many of our advocates, it's important to stay informed for our meetings with Congress. I think Carl Heike might have a last minute point to make. We'll give him the last question of the day then.
I'm just curious about the ending of school segregation in Latvia. In Estonia right now, they've started introducing universal Estonian education this year, starting with grades 1 and 8. Does Latvia plan to have the same sort of transition where it starts at certain grades and then it slowly moves to covering every single grade in Latvian? Or is it going to be a more universal and rapid transition?
Thank you for the question. And in my view, the approach in Latvia is quite similar. So there's also a gradual process. And starting next year, next academic year, all classes will be taught in the Latvian language, of course, Russian language or the German, Belarusian or Ukrainian language will be taught, as a separate subject. But language of instruction will be Latvian only then. But having said that, there also are some issues, to implement that in practice, because I think that this decision should have been taken a lot earlier, and that is, sad that it took so many years, because I think, integration starts from the school. And there are questions about the language proficiency of teachers, because not all of them have the right level, and we'll see how that will function. So there will be challenges. It will not be an easy process, because one thing is, to start, to draft a law and to adopt it, and the other thing is to implement it in practice.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you again, Māris, for taking the time to be with us today. I just reflected a little bit on Lee's last point about your stay in research in the U.S., and I'm glad that you were here for such a long time as you were to sort of help expand the Baltic view of things to a primarily American audience, I suppose. So we appreciate it. Hope you can get back again, and hope we can see you somewhere here, there, or on the road. So thanks once more.
Thank you for listening to Baltic Spotlight, produced by the Joint Baltic American National Committee. Connect with us by emailing jbank@jbank.org and follow us on Instagram @jbankbaltics to stay up to date on opportunities for advocacy and the latest updates on Baltic Spotlight. We hope you enjoyed the program.